Welcome to BBI Online Live. Your host, John McDevitt, and with me, of course, is senior editor of Big Blue Interactive, Mr. Eric Kennedy. Eric, whew, here we are, another full week since the last show. A lot of stuff's happened. How you doing?
Good, good. I guess we're gonna talk a little Hard Knocks tonight because that concluded, and there were a lot of good pieces of information that came out of that I think that are fun to kind of go over and talk about.
It was a crazy start to the end. We're going to talk about that, but one thing I know you and I were talking, so I wanted to give folks kind of a heads up. We will be having a guest on very soon. In fact, it might have been a little bit sooner, but the guest has asked us to wait until the announcement of where they fall on the Giants' top 100 and wants to basically kind of bring those things together. That announcement will come out and then wants to be on the show as far as that. But I can tell you the player expects to be in the top 25. So it'll be that kind of a player. We are working on getting others, but that'll be the first big guest that we've had in the rebirth of BBI Online Live. So we do have that coming up in the near future, Eric.
Yeah, that's really exciting. So, little teaser out there for everyone.
I mean, I could tell you, but it's more fun if we just wait. Let the announcement happen. We are trying to get a lot of other folks, have made a lot of contacts, and we'll see where we're going. But let's start off, Eric. We basically Hard Knocks has run through. We had the completion of it, but let's kind of go back because you and I haven't really had the chance to break it down. Let's take it episode by episode, kind of chronologically get us to the end, and we'll kind of review each episode, talk a little bit about those. You're gonna highlight them, and then we'll talk our reactions, and we'll get to the end.
Yeah, I went back and rewatched the shows, kind of fast forwarded over some of the fluff pieces, but if you go back and look at it, there were a lot of interesting things that I won't say I missed, but they have more emphasis on watching a second time. So let's go, starting off with episode one, which really covers January through February. I thought the big reveal in that first episode was Shane talking about, and he was pretty upfront about this, that they were going to shift from their resources, shift from the running back to the offensive line. And it kept coming up in the show about finding cheaper alternatives at running back. And then when the pro personnel department, which really was Chris Rossetti and Tim McDonald, were pushing back a little bit on keeping Barkley, Shane wasn't having anything of it. So I thought that was interesting because a lot of the beat reporters were harping on this during the free agency, and I think the show verified it. They took resources from the running back position to put into the offensive line, and they took resources from the safety position, Xavier McKinney, and put it into the edge or the pass rush. And then when they were discussing it in the show, they were discussing, well, what do we do? Are we looking at an interior inside rusher, or are we going to get an edge rusher? But they knew that they had to spend money there, and there was a finite pie. And they actually didn't spend much time talking about Xavier McKinney, which is interesting because he got double the money that Saquon got. But I thought that was the first point that came out of the first episode. And then the second one was, and this was really, they ended it on this, and I don't think a lot of people really picked up on this. Shane said the plan all along was to give Jones 2 years, and if he can't do it, we have to pivot. And he told that to Mara, and he also said it in a separate meeting when all the personnel guys were in his office. He basically said, now you and I know, and most of the audience knows, they're locked into Daniel Jones this year because of the contract. They couldn't have cut him or traded him this year, even if they wanted to. But and this is going to be a constant theme in the other episodes that we discuss, they clearly, and this is the first point, there's going to be a recurring point that I'm going to keep raising. They clearly aren't sold on Daniel because he came out and said it. He said, we're at a crossroads with him. We will give him an offensive line. We'll give him the tools to throw to, and we're going to find out if he can do it or he can't. And then piggybacking on that was the constantly mentioning of the injuries, his injury history. So there's another point I want to get into, but I think, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that too.
Yeah. So going backwards, finish where you just finished and then coming back. the thing with the Jones, and I rewatched that first episode, and what caught me was I believe it was right towards the very tail end, the conversation between Shane and Mara.
Right.
And when Mara talks about Barkley not being there, and Jones and Shane's basically saying, listen, we paid $40 million for a quarterback, and we don't, that's what we got. You can see, and this is a point I made before, and I'm going to stick to it. I can't prove it, but I'm sticking to the way things fell. I think all along people keep thinking Mara has this unbelievable love for Jones, and I don't think it's true. I think Mara had a huge love for Barkley. The idea was to try to keep Barkley. He was okay with spending the money because you can hide money in a quarterback contract a lot better than you can in a running back contract, because the quarterback contracts are just off the charts. You can't reset the market, you as the team, for a running back, because you're going to blow everything up. That just doesn't make sense. So Shane's doing everything possible to not let Mara. And I think this was the part where I'll give somebody credit. I absolutely just can't believe I'm going to do this. I'll give GoTerps credit for this one portion of it. I think Mara was his involvement, it's his love of like his thought that the most popular player, which ties to merchandising and fans, even though I don't think it's not as popular as he wants to think. He seems to think that means more to the structure of the team than it really does. You would have blown their entire salary cap. Everything would have been ruined. If they franchised Barkley, Jones is gone. There's no way Jones, either that or you're going to pay him even more than you did.
Right.
Like, they locked him in with what they did with the franchise tag in hand to give to Barkley. And that, as you said, Barkley screwed them, took him all the way up to the last minute. He refused to take the contract before, wasn't going to do it. And the Giants had no choice. They built in the money to Jones, but look how they did it though. It's almost all like the main part of where the Giants are committed is front loaded. If he does not get hurt, and that's a big thing this year, and plays poorly, he's gone. We can just move right on without him. We'll take the loss. The dead money isn't that bad. If he plays pretty well, we can continue to add all this other stuff and still look, because I think, like you said, they've mentioned the injuries way too many times to not be a real concern. So I don't want to get too bogged down in that. I do think the Mara conversations with Shane, the only thing that bothered me is I just think Mara is just he's fan focused too much, because there are a lot of fans. If they were running the team, I don't care what anybody else says. Oh,
well, let's not get to that into that too much, because that's an upcoming episode. That's coming.
Yeah. So with that being said, I do believe that his love of Barkley was clouding a lot of the conversations.
Oh, sure.
They were having.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and then the other thing, because I want to move on to the meteor episodes, which were 2, 3, and 4. But the last point on episode 1 was on the defense. Again, there was a lot more in each of these shows, but these are the things that really caught. I was taking notes, and these are the things that caught my eye. So they completely avoided, well, not completely, they almost completely avoided the Wink departure. They mentioned
they glossed
over that, and they glossed over the fact that Shane Bowen wasn't our first choice, but they show that him getting hired. But there was a discussion: do we go for the one guy in free agency, the high price guy, the quality,
right,
or do we go for quantity? Shane says we have a lot of holes. Do we get the one guy, or do we go get a bunch of cheaper guys? And obviously they went for Burns. That they didn't mention that in the first episode, but that discussion happened in the first episode. And then that's the same episode where Bowen briefed the team for the first time, and he talks about his defense, which was interesting. He talked about how it's important to have those elite pass rushers, and that if he has those kinds of guys, it makes his defense work, which most defenses would if they have elite pass rushers. But the other thing is that they teased at the end of that episode, or in the middle of that episode, that's the first time the Panthers talked to Shane about Brian Burns.
Right.
So obviously, and I heard, people on the site know this. I had heard later on, before free agency started, that the Giants were trying to get Burns, and I was told to keep that quiet, and I kind of teased it on the site. So Burns was somebody they very much were interested in, and that got teased there. Before I go on episode 2, was there anything there?
I just want to ask you, there was a lot made on the site about the discussion with Mara. I think Mara was involved in it a little bit, but most of the front office staff in talking about, well, if we franchise Barkley and try to trade him and all this stuff. I felt like a bunch of that talk and the talk where Dayball comes into the office to talk to Schoen about hiring Bowen.
Yeah.
I thought that was all really kind of overly staged. Like it was conversations that had already happened and they were just doing it for the cameras, because at no point after the season were they talking for the first time like, well, if we franchise and trade him, that was just for everybody who doesn't really know football to understand that would be really complicated and hard to do. But I mean, there's no way the Giants were sitting there.
Some of the show felt staged, you're right. And some of it, especially with the parts with Dable at times, felt staged. I hope they were staged because some of them, the whole thing about Dable showing Schoen the defensive rankings of Bowen on his cell phone while they're that discussion would have happened much earlier, and that's preliminary stuff. That
Right.
you know that felt like NFL Films coming to the team saying we can't get Dable to say anything on camera, and the PR department saying, okay, we'll film we'll have something staged for you. That's what it felt like to me.
Right.
I hope that's what it was, because that just seemed too ad hoc to me.
I mean, for anybody who understands how even any hiring process goes, if you have a guy above you, but it's for your staff, you have to explain to the guy above you. That's already done before you start interviewing the guy about why he's qualified. Not going, hey, I'm going to offer him the job. Oh, by the way, did you see the stats where he is defensively?
Yeah. Well, not only that, but where he goes, I'm going to go with Schoen, and he goes, Bowen.
I know, like was there another Schoen that we interviewed? But I did like the very last shot about fixing the run defense. That was 100%.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. So that caught my attention the first time, and it's worse than I realized, or better, depending on your view. Dable really took a shot at Wink there.
Oh.
I mean, that was a big time shot at Wink, saying, I wish I wrote the quote down. I'm trying to see if I did.
Something like, can we finally fix the run game or something like that?
Yeah, but it was the way he said it too. Yeah. It was like, about time, something like that. That was cool. All right, so moving on to episode 2. So that covered February and March, going up to the start of free agency. And this was a really meaty episode. So there's quite a bit here. That's what I kind of want to move on to these. So there was, at the beginning of the show, there was a heavy focus on scouting of the quarterbacks and the wide receivers. This was pre-combine. So they were the whole early part of the show. So they were clearly looking, we knew they were looking at the wide receivers, but it was more confirmation that they were really heavily looking at the quarterbacks. There were internal meetings discussing them, and they were going through all the guys. And then it went into the combine. And I thought the one of the highlights of the entire show were the interviews of the quarterbacks by Dable, because did two things. First of all, we got to see his personality. We got to see Dable's a smart cookie. We got to see, he doesn't show that to us in the interviews, but we got to see it there. But we got to see that, they were interviewing all the top guys, all the quarterbacks. Even McCarthy was in there. They were interviewing them all. They wouldn't have been wasting their time with their time and the quarterback's time if they weren't interested in them. And right after that, you see Schoen going over to talk to the Patriots. And he said, and I quoted this, before you do anything at 3, make sure you let us know. We're interested. So that was recorded. That was him in the suite that the Patriots had, telling them, don't do anything before we talk. When you're on the clock, or even before that, if you're really interested in moving at that spot, we're interested in moving up. I mean, that's all the confirmation. There's more in other episodes, but again, that's more confirmation that they're not sold on Daniel, and they very much wanted to get the quarterback. Before I move on to the other stuff, the wide receivers, I wanted to get your feedback on that part too.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think also very interesting, though, where they were looking across the scope. It was even though they showed everybody, the Giants' focus clearly was to go up. As you saw the board in the other episodes, that'll confirm that. But they were literally looking at, and they showed Daniels, they show May, those guys. It's very focused, but they wanted to move up. And at no point did I get the feeling that they were like, okay, we'll stay at 6. and then maybe one of the other quarterbacks will still be there. It was up or we're not doing that position is how I felt from that. But they were clearly, I don't know how Daniel Jones could watch that episode and not go,
No,
they
and
were
it gets
looking for
worse. And
my
as we get
replacement.
into episodes 3, 4, 5, it gets worse. I mean, and I will cover that when we get, but it gets worse. I mean, that's the thing that came. So when I went back and looked at this, it was even worse than I came away watching it the first time. And I thought, damn, this is even. I'm actually going into the show. I didn't think they would allow that messaging to get out. I didn't think they
Right,
would allow it to get out that they were that interested in a quarterback. I thought they would couch it in terms of, well, we're doing our due diligence, and when you're picking that high, you got to look at all your options. That didn't come across in these episodes. It came
right,
across as Daniel Jones has excuses. He has had a bad offensive line. He's had injuries, blah, blah, blah. But in no and there's one thing that everyone missed. I want to tease it for an upcoming thing, but there was no point that you come across thinking Daniel Jones is our quarterback. Damn it,
right.
he's our guy, and it gets worse after this. But it just comes up over and over again. And then, oh
One
yeah,
thing on
sure,
just one thing on that. Look at how they framed it as well. They start by showing as Liv Shriver's doing kind of the voiceover. They show Daniel rehabbing, working out, but then mentioning he's had a number of injuries, and then you start seeing the talk of the quarterbacks. That's intentional. Like you're showing a guy working out, he's trying to come back, but there's all these questions: the knee, the neck, and now we see them interested at the combine. So
right,
it was interesting the way it's not like they showed the combine stuff, but then they show it. But Daniel's really working hard. It was the other way around. He's working
right.
really hard, but the Giants are still looking elsewhere just in case.
Yeah, and something I want to mention on that too is the editing of this comes up at times too, and I think I'll mention this in the future episode. But there are certain things that I think when they edited this, they edited out of sequence. So, and that really got into the free agency part where they obviously couldn't have done some of the things they did in free agency if they re-signed Barkley and McKinney. But they
Right,
gave the show at times made it sound like they only did those things because they lost Barkley and McKinney. And that's not the way that's not the way it worked out. It was sort of the other way around, and they edited it in such a way that caused a little bit of confusion there. It's clear if you go back and look at this that they're and Brandon Brown said this in episode 1. He talked about position value. They they
right.
they were talking about Barkley, I think, at that point, but they obviously they do value. There is a position value, and it came up in another piece where they talked about edge rushers, corners, quarterbacks, the positions that we all think about.
Yep.
So so when we go through watch the show, just keep in mind that NFL Films did sort of edit it in a way sometimes that was out of sequence
Yep.
at times, and I think they did that for drama too as
Yeah,
well.
agreed. There, and I will say though, there was a common theme of what is maybe filling or pushing their decision making, and it all was along the lines of previous injuries and wear and tear. They said it about Jones with his multiple injuries. They said it about Barkley, including Shane talking to Frank Gore, where he mentions, hey, Barkley had 900 carries in college, and when he comes out, so we do use 27 years of age with wear and tear as kind of a drop off when it comes to money. But then he mentioned, well, we could still franchise him, and that was prior to the combine. I
Right.
believe it was at the East West
Yes.
stuff. So, but yeah, that was interesting. That's a common theme that clearly they wanted to make sure people heard in their head. Wear and tear, injuries is kind of directing how they're going about their
Right.
business.
And they threw in there that Frank Gore was a big Motor Singletary fan too.
Yes, yeah, yeah. And that's not self-serving in any way whatsoever.
so, so this was a busy episode too. So I just want to mention briefly though that this is where you start to notice that Dable really has a love affair with Malik Neighbors, because he mentions to Shane in the interview room after one of the quarterbacks leaves how much he loved Neighbors on tape, and he's a dog, and boy, man, that guy makes plays, and you've been watching him all. You can tell the love affair is brewing there already. I also thought it was really interesting to see the look on Shane Bowen's face when Brian Burns' name was mentioned. The grin on his face was like, Are you saying that we have a shot at Brian Burns? Because that look was priceless. Again, there was very little mention of Xavier, except they mentioned they were going to meet with his agent, and there was a very brief shot where they were meeting with Jerome Henderson, the defensive backs coach, saying this is where we're at with him. And there was a really interesting point. This is what I was talking about earlier. A really interesting point right after that, where they said, if we do a deal with X, they were saying getting a front seven player was off the table. So they seem to be come out and say that if we resign Xavier McKinney, we probably can't do Brian Burns, because they were mentioning it in the context of the defensive tackle that was being mentioned, but this was also in the Brian Burns conversation.
Right.
So that again gets back to that resources are finite, and they couldn't have done it all, because if everyone remembers, when free agency was done, the Giants were up against the cap. So there
Right.
wasn't any money for Barkley or McKinney, even if they had wanted to come back, because after they signed the two offensive linemen, after they signed the running back, and they got the backup quarterback when Tyrod Taylor went. There wasn't a lot of money left over.
Right. Right.
They're just and Burns, obviously the Burns deal. There just wasn't a lot of money left over. So, and then just ending up on this before I get your thoughts on this, I thought that the real tell on this was at the very end, was the conversation between Shane's and Barkley's agent, and then Shane and Barkley, and where he said they're going to let them have Barkley test the market and just circle back with us. And the agent asked Shane, basically said point blank, where are your thoughts on this? Do you really want him back? And Shane said, I'm torn. He said, I'm
Yeah.
torn. You don't
Yeah.
say that, you don't
Yeah.
say that. And then the whole last conversation with Barkley, man, I got a real bad vibe by it. I've had breakup calls with girlfriends that have gone better than that. I mean, that was painful, and it just came across as a mutual breakup to me at that point. Shane even said, if it doesn't work out, it was nice knowing you. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it was
Right. But
basically just you meant a lot to the organization. But if this doesn't work out, and he said, promise me you'll get back to me before you sign with another team. It just, that made it clear to me. To be honest with you, I don't see financially how they could have re-signed Barkley if they got Burns, if they got the two offensive linemen, and they got, I just don't see how that would have worked out financially for the team.
yeah, and the thing with that conversation, again, it's almost like two people having a conversation that neither one of them really wants to have with the other person. Like Barkley doesn't want to come back. That's obvious. I don't want to come back. I want the money. You're not going to give me the money. So we already know that.
And he feels disrespected. He
And
already
yeah,
feels disrespected.
and you saw that with a couple of teammates who came out like last year, like, oh, well, maybe we gave the wrong guy the money, maybe ex-teammates. You see and other NFL people constantly say that. I'm like, just keep to your own money, by the way. Just be quiet. But he clearly didn't want to. Shane, it almost feels like he has to have this conversation, because if he doesn't, what's he going to tell Mara? That he didn't even try?
Right.
He's got to at least keep that piece up. Neither one of them really wanted to do it. What I thought was kind of interesting, though, was the discussion that Shane was having with his scouting staff and the front office staff about, okay, other running backs in the league.
Yeah.
And they brought up Josh Jacobs, which I thought was interesting. If you think Barkley has wear and tear, Josh Jacobs has a ton of wear and tear. He's not Barkley-esque in terms of like shiftiness or whatever. He's taken a lot of hits. He's a lot more strength and power through the middle. He's a guy, but he's had toe injuries. He's had other lower body. You don't want problems with your feet if you're a running back.
Right.
So to even throw him out there as being like, well, he's younger than Barkley, I'm like, that really told me you were done. You're just looking at everybody. And he was basically saying, well, why would you pay all this money to Barkley when there are other backs in the league? So they said Jacobs, and they brought up a couple of others, and I'm like, they're done. They're done. This is And I think John Mara was the only reason why any of that was happening. But you're right. That call was basically two people going, I'm being forced to do this.
Yeah,
You know,
it sounded like a hostage call.
and they were both being held. It wasn't like one trying to get anybody back. They were both being held. Like Mara's over here holding him hostage. Barkley's like, I don't want to be there, but I'll do this call because my agent told me I need to at least talk to you because he doesn't want to look bad because Barkley's a brand. We talked about this last time.
Right.
Barkley's a brand. He doesn't want to look like, and he doesn't want to look like the shit to the Giants fans because he wants to keep that thing. I wanted to come back. I wanted to be a Giant forever. Blah blah blah. We all know everybody says that until the money comes on the table and then they're out of here. So he didn't want that, and Shane didn't want to look to Mara like he just basically disobeyed him and didn't even try. So he gave it his effort, and that was that. But you're right. It was a conversation that was it was like, just end it, just hang up. It's not happen.
So moving on to the next episode, which was equally so what are we on? We're on 3, right? Aren't
We're on
we?
3.
Yeah.
We're on 3.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so it starts off with Barkley again. And it starts off with the agent saying 12.5 average per year for over 3 years with 25 million guaranteed. And we don't hear the agent. We hear Shane, and then Shane immediately calls Mara and tells Mara, and he says, will that get it done? And he said, well, no, the agent hemmed and hawed when I asked him that. He said, when I reiterated those numbers, if we give you that deal, he will remain a Giant. Shane said, no, the agent didn't even commit to that. So again, that sort of piggybacks on what you were just saying, that he's managing Mara's expectations at this point, is what that came across to me. And then there was a discussion again about Burns. This is after the Mara call. There was a discussion about Burns with the rest of the personnel department, and they said again, if we sign Burns, I'm sorry, he was talking to Shane Bowen on this. He said if we sign Burns and trade for Burns, and it's going to limit what else we can do defensively. You're going to get this guy, and that's basically it. I think he was talking about free agency.
Yeah.
And then it focused heavily on the offensive line. They talked about Robert Hunt being in the discussion along with Illuminor and Runyon, and saying that those were the 3 targets. And there was that weird discussion that you and I talked about last week about Tyrod Taylor. For some reason, they were really gung-ho on bringing back Tyrod Taylor, but that discussion showed that Drew Lock wasn't brought in to really seriously compete. They were talking about Sam Darnold at the same time. In a later episode, they even mentioned Joe Flacco, which I don't get that. But the really interesting quote was this. I had to write this down too. So Daboll says to Shane, so we have the same quarterback room as last year. And Shane goes, for now.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay.
That was pretty telling.
Okay. Now you can read that 2 different ways. You could think about, well, he's talking about the backup quarterback, but maybe we're seeing something. But Dave also made it clear then he wanted Motor Singletary. He said he was, that was obvious. He was like, yeah, I want. So Singletary's his guy. And that makes sense because of their relationship in Buffalo. And this was the episode. This was the painful one where Mara comes in and says, Barkley's our most popular player. And I'd be really, that would be hard for me to take because he's our most popular player. So there's a few more points, but I wanted to get your reaction on that so far.
Yeah. And I'll start with that right there.
Yeah.
And he was being very specific too, because it was if he went in division. They tried to sell it a couple of times that they thought Chicago and possibly Houston might be teams that would go and sign Barkley. And Mara made it very clear if it went in division, that would be a hard pill to swallow. But again, I'm still thinking there are 2 very extremely competing mindsets with what you just brought up. First is the Barkley one. Here we are trying to convince ourselves, or at least Mara's trying to convince himself internally. The team is trying to figure out, can we commit $12.5 million, on average 25 guaranteed, whatever. And at the same time, you were saying Tyrod Taylor, you were almost willing to pay another 10 million for a guy to back up your 40 million guy, and that guy misses just as much time. Where economically would that even remotely make sense to
I,
do
I
that?
yeah, yeah, regardless of what you think about Tyrod Taylor, like you said, and you brought this point up last week, he gets hurt all the time. He can't
Yeah.
even, I mean, when your backup quarterback gets hurt every time he plays, that's a problem. So,
And I
because,
ran the numbers. I put it on the site the other day. I looked back all the way to 2018. He's missed like
oh, he's missed a
almost
ton
like
of time.
60% of the
Oh, yeah,
time.
he's missed a ton of time. And
So
I
I mean,
like him as a player, though he was a little bit overrated. Again, we would have won a game last year if he didn't miss a throw, and I
it
think
was
it was a
the Rams. I think
two-point conversion.
it
Yeah.
was the Rams game.
Yeah, I think so. It was a
Yeah,
two-point
it was a
conversion
2 point
play.
conversion. He
Yeah,
totally just
yeah,
whiffed it.
yeah.
Just
And he
missed the
missed
guy.
it, just completely misfired on, which happens, but that's the difference between winning and losing. So
There was
I thought, oh, I'm sorry.
no, you're fine. There was one thing I wanted to mention for the last episode, but
Yep.
it'll fit here because we were talking about Burns. When you see Morgan talking to Shane, and that's at, I believe, the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
It started with the introduction of Dave Canales, the new head coach of the Panthers, and Shane's, and then they're
Yes. Yep.
joking. Then he jokingly shaking hands with Dan. Oh, hi, I'm Joe Shane. Oh, yeah, I'm Dan Morgan. They were joking because they know each other. Bill, the general manager of the Bills, was right there,
Right.
and when Morgan says to Shane, well, what are you thinking about Brian Burns? What will you get? Did you see the look on
No,
Beane's
I missed it.
face? He
I missed it.
turns like, and I'm thinking, wait a second. Did you only like mention it to the Giants, or like, or is this the first time you're just mentioning it? Because when you go back and look at that, and when
Oh,
you
I
see
have to look at it. I didn't
Beane's
notice
face,
that.
he turns. He's kind of like, wait a second, because I mean, they don't have the money, but man, the Bills could have used a Burns with they don't know if Miller's going to be okay. They've got a lot of stuff that they've lacked, but the look on his face was like, wow, I can't believe you just said that. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up before, but yeah, the thought of the money on Barkley and John Mara, that's the one time. I don't like to beat up on John Mara too much about the Jones stuff and everything else and the meddling owner, because quite frankly, if I was running the team, if I owned it, I'd want to be involved in stuff too. But that just sounded dumb. That just sounded like, oh, we should really just be trying to get Barkley. And I'm thinking, how many wins does that equate to?
Right. We've done that. Been there, done that,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not like you're coming off his rookie year and you're like, oh my God, we got to keep this guy. Look how great he he's a very good player. I do not think he's a great player. I don't want to waste too much time on that. I don't think he's a great player just because his injuries have killed him. He is not the same player he was his rookie year.
Well,
You can and
I
you
know
see it
what,
in the open field.
and I know what the mindset of Mara is right now is we have had a poor product on the field, but the one guy that sometimes puts people in the in the seats is Barkley, and if we get rid of Barkley, then it's going to be worse. But that's the wrong way to look at this.
Right.
And somebody who's been around football as long as he has, and again, you saw him. I was standing on the sidelines when that picture in the 1950s was taken. He's been
Yep.
around the game a long time. He went through the 60s and 70s. He should have learned from some of this, but it's you don't sign the most popular or keep the popular player. You're trying to build a winner, but we got to move on. So I just
Yes.
want to just finish up real quick. So on that episode, it was interesting that the Jets wanted both Runyon and Illuminor, and that drove up the price. And they seem to be a suggestion that took Hunt out of the equation, or that maybe they've gotten Hunt too. I don't know how they would have done that financially, but that's what they suggested. Then the last two really important parts from this episode before we move on to the next one was the agent calls back from Barkley and gives him the details, and he says it's north of the original deal of the 25 guaranteed and 2.5 APY. He said it's north of there, and Shane said we're not going to go there. Where he said
Right.
that's too rich. We're not. And Mara comes in, and this is really damning. I had to turn on the closed captions to hear this because he was mumbling at this part, and I know other people on the website were having the same problem. What did he just say that? Mara was really upset and in his own way, and he starts to walk out of the office, and Shane nervously laughs and says, "We're going to be fine. We're okay."
Yeah.
And Mara said, "I think we were a little too timid." And I didn't know, I couldn't pick that up because I had to turn on the closed captions, but he's saying we didn't make we weren't aggressive enough to try to keep
Right.
Barkley. So
Right.
again, it gives the impression Mara has to be managed. And it was the most telling part was Shane having to tell him, "We're fine. It's going to be okay." It's like me talking to my children.
Right. Everything's
Going,
okay. It's
it's
fine. We'll
going to
be
be
all
all
right.
right. You know, things will be fine. Don't make too much out of this. So I thought that was really. I didn't know what he said, and when I saw it was timid, I'm like, oh dear God, it's worse than I thought. And then NFL Films papers over Xavier leaving for 68 million, double the price Barkley got. So
Right.
see, even position value, even safety is higher than running back at this point. Xavier McKinney got twice the money that Barkley got. And then the last point I wanted to get your reaction on was so Burns free agency starts is going to start and they're trying to get Burns and they can't do anything else until they know if the Burns deal gets done. So
Right.
free agency hits. It's that day. It's on your mark, get set, go. All 32 teams are calling everybody that they want, and they're coming off the board. And Shane's got to sit there and wait until the general manager, his friend, gets back to him from the Panthers, and they're dying in the office. They're like, call him back, because they know every minute they wait, guys that they want are going to
Yeah.
come off the board. And this could have gone and gotten kind of ugly probably for the Giants a little bit if they didn't get Burns, if some of the guys that they had wanted, their plan B, they said plan A was Burns, and if we have to go to plan B, well, if plan B with some of the guys already off the board were gone, free agency might not have worked out as that well for the Giants. I thought that was really interesting. So
Yeah, and the question that I have with that one though is, was that part of the staged piece? Was the
mm.
drama really within the, because I never got the feeling that any of this stuff was a surprise to the Giants at all. In fact, I think you look across the league, you can forget that whole legal tampering stuff was happening from the combine all the way through to get to this point. They knew it. I mean, things happen so fast. There's no way you're doing things without physicals. Too many things are happening. So I don't truly believe that they were waiting and that was holding the other stuff up. I think it might hold some of the smaller things after the fact, like if we don't get this, we're going to have to pivot to something else. And I think the one main thing when they said to Bowen, if we get him, that's pretty much going to be it. I think that, and we've seen it now played out with the draft, and since then, I think that meant you're not getting secondary help. We're not going to get a corner. We're not going to go sign that. If we
And
get
they said
Burns,
that. They
yeah,
said in the earlier episode, he basically said if we get Burns, you're not going to get much else.
right. So
Yeah.
so I don't think the drama was really. I thought it was really weird though that they were debating over exchanging another late round pick and what. I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
just get that done. But yeah, the whole drama built up into that. I do think the Runyon and Illuminor deals were kind of figured out. I think Hunt became out of the equation. I don't think it was tied to the Giants. I think they already heard he was being offered more money somewhere else that took him out of what they were willing to pay.
I do too. I do too. But
The
they made it sound like Hunt was still in the
right,
equation.
right.
But I think Hunt got so much money. I don't see like I think they gave a couple $1 million more between those other two tackles. That wouldn't have gotten you Hunt. I don't think that would have gotten, you know.
What did you think of Illuminor's the way he wanted his deal? It to me it seemed
Well,
kind
that
of
was
odd.
interesting.
He didn't want the longer
He didn't want the 3 year. He wanted, but he did want the money more up front. Yeah, it was interesting. Almost like now we know Illuminor really wants to be with the Giants. He grew up,
right.
wanting to play for this team, and I don't think that's faked. Runyon, it's clear from this, it is clear that players go where the money is because the Runyon thing is he was going to go to the Jets because of the quarterback situation and Paul Hackett's there. But so they had to up that deal. So that anything about the Giants were the best, no, it came down, they were giving him 10 million a year. No, but I thought, yeah, the Illuminor contract was a little odd to me. Maybe he thinks he's set for another big payday if he has 2 more solid years.
Well, I thought about that. If you're coming in and you're being brought over as the swing, you're
Yeah.
possibly a guard, you're possibly a tackle, but we're not going to say you're definitely one or the other. If he's counting on the fact that I'm going to beat out Neil, I will take that job and then I will be up because they won't keep Neil beyond that. If I'm the right tackle, I'm going to want tackle money, full tackle money, not a guy who could be a
Yeah,
guard or a tackle. So he might be banking on himself that way.
exactly.
Not a bad idea
No, it's
because there's
not.
no
There's
guarantees with
some
Neil.
risk involved. There's some risk,
It
but
works both ways.
yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah. So, and then that was it for that episode. Did you have any other thoughts on that, or do you want to move on?
No, I mean, it's those kind of episodes really that I like even more. Like I want to see the behind the scenes. When they kept having the guy running in with the contract details, when we
He was
worked out
good.
this, yeah, it was
He's a
very
good
interesting. I'm like,
character to
man, you're
keep on
just
in
like,
that show. Did you know who was that? Was that Ed Trigg? I don't know who that was.
I'm trying to, yeah,
I should know who that was. They probably said, and whoever he was really good, and they obviously rely on him a lot. So
and he knew his stuff ahead of time. He's like, it's probably going to take us to do this, and I might have to do that, and Shane's kind of like his guys do their thing. You
yeah,
know, he wasn't being dragged in, at least as far as we could tell. He's not being dragged into these calls about the contracts and stuff. There's somebody else is handling that.
oh, exactly. That came across exactly what you just said. He dealt. That was very interesting to me. They dealt with it. They came back and they got fist bumps. You did a
Yeah,
great job. You did it. Oh, last thing on that before we move on the Xavier McKinney too. So again, they portray the thing like all the Giants got blindsided. McKinney left. Again, this goes back to the earlier conversation. If we resign McKinney, we can't get Burns. So I think one of the reasons why McKinney is sort of cut out of this episode is that decision was made, like you said, these decisions are made a lot earlier. I think the decision was made. In a perfect world, we'd love to have him back, but we value the pass rush more than the safety at this point. And
right.
if anything, they just showed Shane being very surprised at how much money McKinney did get. So,
And I think there's something else to be said to that too, is the fact that for us fans, McKinney means something.
yeah,
For HBO, Hard Knocks, the
nothing,
show,
not nothing,
they
but
they don't
yeah.
they don't know him, and he does. And overall, I think the Giants decided probably even before the season was over, if he's not going to come in at this range, we can't pay a safety that kind of money. We've got too many holes. We know he's going to walk. And I think they downplayed it because it's just not a sexy thing. But you're right. He got a ton of money compared to Barkley.
Well,
All this talk
remember,
about
he's
Barkley, but
also the
McKinney got
only.
a lot.
They all remember they said last year during the 2023 season they were not going to discuss an extension with McKinney. This was in
Right.
2023.
Right.
So there's that. All right. So moving on.
Yep.
So episode 5 we'll get to at the end. There wasn't much there, but 4 was really juicy. So this covers March and April. Free agency starting. And they're starting to show the pro days. So the first wave of free agency is over with the big signings on the offensive line, the Brian Burns trade. They got Locke at quarterback, and they move on to the pro days. So they show Dable going to Neighbors Pro Day. Again, here's another tick where Dable is going off on how great Neighbors is. So part 2 of the love affair with Dable and Neighbors. They have they show the quarterbacks and the wide receivers coming to the team facility for the 30 visits. And it was really interesting seeing Mike Groh, the wide receivers coach, meet with all 3 of the wide receivers. And at the end, Mike Groh said his favorite receiver was Neighbors. He had him ranked above Marvin Harrison. And when the quarterbacks were in, they showed May, McCarthy, Daniels. We know that I think there were others there, but they showed those visits. And they show the scene where they asked Dable afterwards, "Would you trade up for Daniels?" His expression was like "Hell yeah, yes I would," which was very interesting. Again, if you're Daniel Jones, your your head coach just said, "Oh yeah, I trade up assets just to get a
Right.
new
Right.
quarterback." If I'm Daniel Jones and I'm watching this episode, I'm like, damn. Now they did not show much about May, and that may be protecting the parties there. He was there at the facility. They didn't show Dable talking about him. They showed this sort of nondescript comment from Kafka about, if you believe a quarterback, you should trade up for him. And then it got into I thought this is the one thing that I think a lot of people missed, and I want to get your reaction on what I've said. But this one is Dable's, and this felt a little staged too. Dable going through the quarterbacks that had failed in the last
Yes.
10 years. Okay.
Yep.
So he went through this entire list. How many guys in this list were hits? And one at the very, very end, Dable doesn't even mention Mahomes. He says Stroud, which, seemed a little odd to me. But who didn't they mention? Daniel Jones.
Right.
Daniel Jones was
Right.
in that group. They basically just admitted on TV
Right.
in a room full of people that we missed on Daniel Jones because they went through the entire list. How many hits are here? No one stood up and said, well, we got Daniel Jones.
Right.
I think we all kind of missed that the first time. I wanted to get your reaction on any of that before the other points.
Yeah. I mean, first off, again, that another one of those things that I totally agree with you. I feel like it's just this stage thing. I find it very interesting if you look at the landscape of what happened. I think McCarthy, to the dismay of others, Penix and Nix, I
Knicks.
don't think we're in consideration at all unless we dropped down,
Right.
took
We
extra
know
picks,
that now.
and they fell down.
Yeah.
I don't think they really had their eyes set on anybody but May because I think they already earmarked Williams was gone. You knew he was going number one. I think they knew Daniels was gone, but they asked, would you trade? He goes, for Daniels? Absolutely. So I'm like, wow, okay, so we've now admitted, but we know he's gone. The guy they didn't talk about, but clearly we're not trying to move up to 3 to get 2 guys we already know are gone. So you're moving up for May. That was it. That was the only discussion. And they really shied away from showing that. The other thing I wanted to ask you, though, because of what you talked about,
Yeah.
what did you think about the fact that they brought all 3 receivers into the room at
That
the
was
same
interesting.
time?
I didn't think they did things like that. That was weird to me, but I thought it was interesting. I would think, I don't know what to make out of that. I did not
See,
like that.
it's interesting because that question came up for Washington because they brought multiple quarterbacks in at the same
But they
time.
took them golfing or something like that. It was some
But
weird,
but still, you usually don't have them interact with
no.
each other because you kind of send different messages to different guys depending on what you're doing. I'm sure the Giants had conversations with Manning that they talk completely different to Roethlisberger and Rivers and those guys. So they didn't get all 3 of them together.
They didn't roll out the red carpet for them.
But
That's what it went down.
the 3 receivers together in the same room, I thought was really interesting, and I thought it was intentional. Of those 3, when you saw that and when they were done and they were talking, was there one of those 3 that you felt like, I think the Giants think he's a great player, but I don't think they're overly interested in he's going to be the guy? Because I did. There was one that I did, and it's not the guy you're going to think it is.
You're going to say Rome, right?
No, I think Rome was the other one they were interested in. I don't think they were interested in Harrison.
But
I
they
think
came out and said that though. But they
it was weird the way they talked, and then when they had another conversation afterwards, if we do this and Adunze's still there, I at no point did I get the feeling that they were really kind of gung ho about Harrison. I think the questions that Harrison brings with him, and the reason they asked him who would come with you, I think those are real. I think those concerns are real. It's not that he's a bad guy. I just think that they think there might be complications. I think it was Neighbors and Aduns because I don't think they would have taken a receiver. I think they would
But
have dropped.
they did say when they went over, then this sort of farther down in the show, which was a really interesting part. When they sat down with the 2 owners, they did say it's going to be Harrison or Neighbors. They did say that. So
yeah, I mean, and you might be right. I just got this weird feeling from that wasn't the way it would have gone.
yeah. So, but they there was one point. What was the other one I wanted to bring up? Oh, the Mara talks of they're talking about trading up for the quarterback, and Mara's getting vibes of
Oh yeah,
Eli Manning, and he's getting nervous, and he talks about what a big deal that was for him, but that all made him nervous. But I think we all thought that was a little the similarities were a little odd about the timing of it, the 20-year anniversary
right.
of the Eli Manning trade. I know what I was going to say. The part that was interesting about all of that too was the conversation Shane had with his family when they were in the office, and people will say, well, that was a throwaway thing. What was interesting to me was 2 things. One was more throwaway, but everybody in the family wanted a quarterback, which makes you think, what kind of dinner conversations are they having?
Right.
But this get back to the point that you were making. This is the point that I wanted to make. So when he was writing down the names for his daughter, he said, well, first his son said Jaden Daniels, and he said Daniels isn't going to be there. And I will say this, Giants predicted not that it was overly hard, but they predicted which picks would go off the board pretty accurately. They
Right.
weren't surprised by that. But he said Daniels is going to be off the board before 3. And he wanted to write down for his daughter who to pick, and he put down May and 3 wide receivers. He didn't give her any other options. He said
Right.
these are the players that we're going to choose from at 6. And it was almost like did he definitively tell us then and there, by indirectly going through his daughter, these were always going to be the guys. It was either going to be one of the wide receivers, or it was going to be May at that point, because they knew Daniels was going to go to Washington, I think, at that point.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought that was interesting too. You know, why wouldn't you get, of course she was pretty young, but I mean, it was
Yes,
pretty,
but
it's
he wrote
pretty,
those names down.
it was pretty specific.
Yeah.
He knew. So yeah. And again, when you kind of look at the discussions that we're having, it's very interesting how I there's all, again, I said this last show, all this talk of this guy's racing up the board and, oh, this might be happening. Oh, there's all these. Now we're hearing, I don't care what's happening. The Giants, they knew pretty much who was going to go where. Conversations with teams, they know to each other to a degree. You don't, and that's not, that's how you sometimes jump another team. If you're a guy like Gettleman and you just tell everybody, exactly what you're going to do.
Right.
When you put out there that the guy's been touched by the hand of God, that kind of tells you that you're probably taking that guy no matter what.
Not only that, but remember, the Giants didn't have contingency plans if their guys were off the boards. At least this time they did. I mean,
Right.
you saw if the worst case scenario happens, this is what we're going to do. They had a worst case scenario. They
Right.
didn't do that under some of the other general managers they've had.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I'm not saying Cedric Jones, but I mean
yes,
Cedric Jones. I mean,
yes,
there you go. But
yes.
yeah, so it was interesting. But I do think, you look at it. It was definitely May was the guy. But if Daniel somehow had slipped, if somehow Washington went May, I think we might have given up whatever New England wanted to get
Well,
Daniels.
well, that's a nice segue. So the conversation that they show in the office is Shane talking to the Pats, and Shane said, "Are you serious about possibly trading down, or are you stringing us along?" I think he actually used the word "stringing us along."
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and he said, we're looking at giving you our 2025 first round pick, maybe something else. And the Pats GM says 1, 2, 3 this year, 1 and 2 next year. And then he kind of said, well, he said something to the effect like, well, that's just a starting point, or, just throwing that out there. But, they were thinking about a huge, Ricky, what was the trade? The Vikings trade, the running back. I can't even think of his
Oh,
name.
the Herschel Walker trade.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
Herschel. They were thinking of a big trade there. So
right.
you're talking a 1, 2, 3 this year and a 1 and a 2 next year. I mean, Derek May isn't a sure thing. There
No, no,
that's the problem. So my strong impression, and I know people I respect the hell out of, like Cy, disagree with me, and Cy thinks that the Giants never really were going to go get the quarterback. I don't believe that after watching this. I don't think they edited this in any shape. And again, why would the Giants want to get this message out there that they don't believe in Daniel Jones anyways? But
right.
I think it's pretty darn clear the Giants would have drafted a quarterback had they been at 1, 2, or 3. They tried to get up to 3, and the price was so, in their mind, astronomical that they just weren't willing to do it. Now, someone out there might say, hell yeah, I would give up, 1, 2, 3 and a 1 and a 2 for May. That's a really steep. I mean, you're basically franchising your immediate future for a quarterback that didn't play great football in his last year in college. So, again, not to make this the Go Terps show, but even Go Terps isn't even sold on Derek May. So,
Right, right.
so I think the Giants pivoted at that point, and no one wants to hear that, because they say you can always come up with a solution. No, you can't. That's the
Right.
thing. There's not always there is the Kobayashi Maru scenario, or it's a no-win
Nice.
scenario. They just they weren't willing to give up that. And I think if we had said, I think a lot of fans would have been really upset with that deal. If they had done with that deal, I think there would be a lot of us going, oh Jesus, he better be the next coming of. I mean, he better be better than an Eli. Even he better
Right.
be, he better be damn good at that point. So they didn't give
Now,
up that much for Eli.
right, right. And I'll own up to anything that I've said or believe, whatever. And I know you saw leading up to the draft that I was all in on May. May was the guy that I wanted. I said it over and over and over again. 1, 2, 3, 1, and 2. You might as well tank May's career if you do that. You bring him in. We have some receivers, but not enough.
Right.
We don't have a superstar. We don't have someone who can make the other guys better.
Right.
You're borderline average at best at tight end, because at the time we still don't even know. We don't have Theo Johnson at this point, and we don't know what he's going to be yet. We hope so. You're average at best or below average at tight end. You just lost your running back, so now you're trying to fill running back spots. So you would basically be taking a rookie quarterback, throwing him in. He's going to back up the guy that he's going to replace. That guy's got to play. You're not going to throw May in and just sit Jones, because now we can't get anything for him. He's got to play to show something if you think you're going to trade him. So if you give that much away, we're done. We've tanked it. It's not
the problem. If you've got the quarterback and nothing around him, then so there is such a thing as quarterback hell, and we're in it. That's what people don't want to recognize. Hell exists, and we're in it right now, unless Daniel Jones turns his career around until we get a new quarterback. So that's where we're at right now. And they say, well, fix it. Well, that's easier said than done. And then Shane said there was the quote right after that was, and he was saying to Tim McDonald, he said this, now we know we can't move up. So we're going to have to pivot. He said it. So we now know we're not going to be able to move up. So, and that's when the focus became Neighbors. And, there was the line when they were going over the draft. He said, come on, Malik Neighbors, be there when they're discussing. So there was I think the one takeaway from this too, and again, I don't know how you would edit that in, but over and over again, it, Grove's comments, Dable's comments, Shane's comments, they were really high on Neighbors, and Dable, and I'm teasing the episode 5 here, but he was number 1 on Dable's board, and he was number 1 on Mike Rowe's board. They said it earlier on in the process, so they really, really liked Neighbors, and he was the consolation prize. He was the guy so again, why we're focusing so much on Daniel Jones is, again, over and over in these episodes, it came across that they weren't happy at quarterback. If you were going to put out a PR fluff piece, the message wouldn't be, we don't believe in our quarterback. It would be the opposite, and that's not what this show did. So that was my overarching takeaway.
And one thing with that, because I know people just go ape on the site about this. What do you want the Giants to say, though? Jones is the quarterback at the moment, and quite frankly, I've said this in the last show, and I'll say it again. Regardless of the things that he has not done yet, he's still the best quarterback that we have on the roster at the moment. You can't say DeVito's better. We know he threw the ball downfield, but he'd made a lot of other bonehead plays. He got sacked a lot. He's not very big, and he might get killed if he ran a few times like he tried to before. Right. Locke is potentially Jones equal, but we don't know that yet. No. He has some qualities, but then there's other qualities he won't bring to the table. Right. So at the moment, you are where you are. But they're not lying when they say who would have thrived behind 5 turnstiles. Patrick Mahomes is not lighting it up. I don't care what he did with Kansas City and their no-name wide receivers. If he's playing behind that offensive line, it was so bad last year. It was epically bad. Then you look at the receivers. I mean, Sterling Shepard was still on the team. That's right. Hodgins was starting to drop. We didn't know what happened. Hyatt didn't really develop. Is it because of the quarterbacks? To a degree. But it's also because they just weren't really ready yet. We didn't have that. So to think, okay, we'll just go get a quarterback and now that changes everything. It doesn't, because all the other weaknesses are still there. If you can fill those weaknesses in, maybe Jones is serviceable enough to get us to 9 or 10 wins. I understand that some people's comments will be it's about winning championships, but you know what? The Giants didn't win a championship in '84, but they built forward. That's what they did. But they came off a 3-12-1 season. They didn't win a championship in '85, but they built forward, and then
Right.
'86, and then from there, you've got to start somewhere. You can't just keep going. Well, we'll just forget it. We'll just go get a quarterback, and we'll let him, and we'll play him behind the most inept offensive line in the history of the NFL.
Right. And then just to finish up this episode, how it ended up, which was interesting, is it showed Shane having conversations with tons of teams about trading up and trading down. He had
Right.
conversations, and I didn't pick this up the first time. He did definitely have conversations about trading up to number 4 and number 5. And I assume that was just in case one of those quarterbacks, for whatever reason, let's be blunt, just in case the Patriots took McCarthy and May fell. I think
Right.
that's what that was just they didn't want someone else to trade up like the Vikings to get May at that point. So that would be the only reason, because their discussions after that was they weren't worried about the wide receivers going to or they weren't worried about Malik Neighbors going to Arizona. They thought Harrison was going to go to Arizona.
Right.
And they weren't too worried about the Chargers. But they also game plan in case that did happen, about trading back. So they talked to a bunch of teams about trading back. And the one that was interesting is the Bears, going down to the Bears, and they would get their 3rd and 4th round pick to drop down to 9, and the Giants at that point would be hoping that Odunze would fall, and if not that, Bowers at tight end would be there. So again, the quarterbacks, the other 3 second-tier quarterbacks that you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
were never in the discussion there, for whatever reason. But Bowers was, and they really. I mean, I came away with the impression that they did like Rome a lot. I do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was their fallback, and they were. It would have been interesting. It'd be interesting to see the careers of Malik and Rome, and see what might have been with the 3rd and extra 4th round pick at that point. I don't regret that, but then somebody could also trade it up and gotten Rome at that point, and then you get Bowers. But that was the end of that show. Was the really interesting discussion with Mara and Tish game planning about how the first 6 picks would go. So.
And that thing, and I don't know if you want to talk about it in the next episode, but that's the one I brought up before. It was just weird seeing Mara and Tish in a room together. It's literally like you could have filmed that as them sitting there by themselves and then just splice it together, and they would have had as much connection as they were when they were actually in the room together.
Yeah, and I kind of like when you mentioned that in the last episode, I was like, yeah, I don't know. But then when I watched it again, you might be onto something, because they were kind of leaning away from each other.
It's
like, but in the last episode, after the Malik Neighbors pick, they both shook hands with each other and were very chummy. But you're right. So their legs were sort of crossed. Not the most masculine way, I will throw that. Crossed, and they were leaning away from each other, and they weren't even like looking in the same. It looked like they weren't even looking at the video, the screen in front of them. It almost like they like Tish seemed to like be looking away from Mara a little bit. Anyway,
so the difference.
I'm reading way too much into that, but
we could be, and I started it. I said it, but I'll say this: the difference between the 2 scenes that you mentioned. The scene in that episode, and then the scene after the draft. After the draft, by the way, it's ridiculous. I don't know why they do this. Every freaking team after they draft, they act like literally they had no idea what they were getting. They open the box like, oh my God, it's Malik Neighbors. And everybody gets up and shakes hands and high fives and hugs. I'm like, you've been going over this for but it's all for the cameras, and every team does it now and whatever. So I don't know if I buy a lot into that. The other one is on camera, but it's not being shown at that time. Like right now, we're recording this and we're going to put it up after.
You're right. Yeah.
That was it. Just, and again, I could be totally making that, just reading into it. But if it were me and I'm one of the other owners, like I'm like, I want to see what you're thinking too. Like, are you, what do you think? I'm kind of, and there was none of that. They don't really even acknowledge each other.
Right. And again, we don't know what was edited out, and it was only
true.
So we're probably reaching, but again, you mentioned it. I looked at it and I'm like, well,
just body language just said there was something different.
Like if I'm sitting next to you, I'm not leaning away from you.
Right.
So, all right. So let's move on and finish this up and get an overview on this. But so, episode 5 was kind of the weakest of the 5. Some of that was just because again, there were no surprises and we knew what they were going to do. I think they did drop the ball on it a little bit because they could have done more with um, the reaction of the players getting drafted. There's some really good clips out there when the players called in after they were picked, to how emotional they were. I was shocked that they didn't put that in there. They could have put more 30 visit stuff, flashbacks to when they met with these players, because they did, and they have them all on tape, where they could have sort of like, yeah, they got the guy that they met back with in March,
Right.
and it just would have been nice. There was a lot of fluff, but the things that came across, I thought, in this was, um, um, they when they were going through the draft, one of the things, the comments came up, says just not Malik. So it was clear that they really wanted Malik at this point. And after he was picked, Shane went over to Dable and said, "You got your number one you got the receiver who was number one on your board." So again, it was Dable thought, and Groh both thought Malik Neighbors was better than Harrison. So I thought that was really
Right.
interesting.
Right.
Then they showed before that, the trade offers. So they did show the Colts and the Jets calling. They didn't let us know what the Jets offered, but the Colts offered the 15th pick in the first round, a fourth and a sixth, and next year's two. And the reaction was no, no, no. We didn't hear what the Jets did, and they had previously teased that the Vikings had called with their picks, and they didn't show that in this episode. So they didn't show everything that was they didn't show everything. I mean, that it was odd that it was in a tease, but it was in the episode. And then
Right.
they get into the second day. Well, before we get into the second day, I want to hear your thoughts on the first round.
Yeah. So what I thought was interesting is when they were talking about the Chargers, they mentioned Alt. But as the pick is about to go in, they started to question whether it was going to be Latham or Alt.
Latham, yeah. That
So, but at no point in that discussion, because I know that's come up on the site and somebody
yeah.
in particular has mentioned, at no point were they like, well, if they go Latham, do we consider all? I mean, they weren't going tackle. And by the way, you cannot draft another tackle after all the money you've drafted Thomas, you drafted Neal, you drafted JMS, who, dear God, please do not be hurt any longer than you already are.
Right.
And then you just sign some free agents. You can't draft another tackle, especially a right tackle, right there, regardless of whether you think. I mean, the quality in that. So when we hear value at 6, you can't take another tackle. You've taken one
Well,
at 4, and what was it, 4 and 7 that we've done so
yeah,
far?
and Neal had played right tackle in college. Alt hadn't. Again, it's a projection pick. So
Right, right,
and like you said, it's that, and plus, if you go back in time, you would have not have drafted Neal. You would have taken the receiver the Jets took. So,
right.
I mean, again, look, I'm all about building in the trenches too, but I had a problem drafting a right tackle back when they took Neal, and it
Right.
wasn't Neal that I had a problem with. I just didn't think it was smart to spend a top 7 pick on a right tackle. In hindsight, it makes me look better than I intended to be, because I didn't realize Neal was going to be a bust, but
Right. You were
hopefully
thinking
it's
more like
not. But it's not looking good at this point. Then in the
right.
second round, what was really interesting, and I was kind of surprised they let this out, was they really wanted to get the outside corner, so they mentioned McKinstry and Lassiter. I thought one of the interesting things was that they had kind of hid Ryan Crowden from the Titans that came over, the ex-GM there, the whole show. But he got word of Lassiter being selected early, and when he just made like a sigh or something, everybody's head snapped back to look at him. I think he's got more say than they showed in this show. I just looked like they were. I don't know why we didn't see more Ryan Crowden in this, but I just thought that was interesting that everybody. And what was really interesting was, if you hadn't seen it, I noticed that you like looking at body reactions. Go back and look at Dable's reaction when Lassiter gets taken. He
Yeah.
thrusts his head back and he's like, "Damn it!" He's
Yeah.
really pissed off. I thought that was kind of telling. And then of course they did then go back and show that 7 hours earlier that they said if those two corners were gone, they'd get Newbin. So that was
it I know a lot of people started bringing up clearly the Giants draft for need, not best player available. And I think almost every team in reality,
Okay.
somehow best player in need matches up.
Yeah.
But I do think this was highly edited to ultimately be that way, because they clearly could have had another player from another position that they thought, oh wow, this guy's starting to drop. And if but then it's gone. And but they obviously filmed pieces just in case. McKinstry was never going to drop down that far, or at least wasn't expected to. Lassiter was a little different. I wasn't overly sold on him, but whatever. They clearly wanted a corner, or at least DB, because then Newman is the backup, at least from what they showed. But was there a running back maybe that they talked about? But the running backs kept sliding, so they were like, wait, there's a pool of them, so let's let that go and go for another position. Because that's the other thing that triggers not necessarily need per se, but when a run on a position happens and you need a position, you kind of have to then start ranking some of those guys. If you had them even with other players, that they're gonna be moved up because it is of importance.
Right.
So if I've got 5 guys roughly the same, but 2 of them are at positions that I have starters at right now that are okay, I'm going to take the guy that we're at more of a need. So I think people get too wrapped up in that kind of thing, because that reverse thinking got us people like Clint Sintum way back when they're like, oh, we'll just get him. Yeah, he's a great 3-4 backer. The problem is we were playing 4-3, so that didn't help out at all.
And then just to finish this up, they did mention that that earlier they showed they went back and they showed that they felt that the corner Andrew Phillips was the last corner on their board. This was earlier than the draft day, but they showed an earlier meeting where they said he was the last guy on the board before the corners really fell off. So I thought that was interesting, and that they showed the scene where Phillips did meet with the Giants in a 30 visit. That's what I wish we had more of, that those snippets, those conversations. But maybe again the players would have had to sign off on that stuff too. And then they did spend a little bit on Theo Johnson and how much time this Giants spent on him. I have a really good feeling about him, so I'm really happy about that pick. And then they spent some time on Tracy, and they didn't spend much time on the last pick, which I would have liked that, and I would have liked more on the UDFAs, the undrafted free agents. I wish they had spent more time there instead of like showing the real housewives of the Giants at the end. But
well, and this came up, and I'll give credit to where I first heard the conversation. So Bobby Skinner and Justin Pelnick, I guess, their show, I think it's Talking Giants. They did it right after the last episode, and one of the things they brought up is the weird sort of transition where if you don't really follow the NFL that closely, like you might be a casual fan and you're an HBO person, you come across it. It gives the impression that the second the draft ended, they just took off and went to Tommy whatever's restaurant. There's no way that happened.
No.
Undrafted free agents were being signed, and you're right, they didn't show that at all. But they made it seem like the draft ended, and then those guys all went out to eat.
That would have been like a different day. That would have been
yeah. And do I really care what Dayball's wife and Shane's wife thought of who we were getting? We just watched. No, I couldn't care. But I agree with you. The undrafted piece is very interesting, because I'd like to see who's making these calls and getting some of those locked in. We saw with the contracts with the free agents, how did it work with the undrafted guys? You must have like 4 or 5 people on different phones trying to get, because you're competing with every other team in the league trying to get certain players in.
The Giants have done, I don't remember, what's the name of the show that they do the last couple of years that they put off in the off season? Giants Life?
Something like that. Yeah.
Their last two, the 2022 and the 2023 version of that during the draft was better than what NFL Films did with Hard Knocks, with the fifth episode. Because we got to see the UDFA calls. We didn't see, in detail, but we saw snippets of them. So we saw them talking about that, and Brandon Brown was talking about how that was just as important he said it was the best, his favorite part of the draft was calling the undrafted free agents after the draft was over, which I thought was interesting. So we saw that existed. They didn't, and it kind of gets back to what you said earlier. The producers think the audience isn't going to care. I think people that are watching Hard Knocks though are people that do care. So right. I would have put that in there. I don't, my wife was kind of watching this show from time to time at Border, so she'd get on her cell phone and start, looking through Twitter or whatever. But she wasn't picking her head up when Mrs. Shane and Mrs. Dable got on there and were talking about social media reactions. That didn't catch her
Yeah.
or anything like that. All I heard from her in the background was, Daniel Jones sucks.
See,
So,
I have the different piece here. My wife will fall asleep during the game. She doesn't even care. She'll be reading a book, doing whatever. She doesn't care about the games at all. She's like, "Well, I really find this stuff interesting." I was like,
oh, good.
I wish you'd feel that way during the game,
Well, I
or at
tried to
least
get her to
not care."
watch it, but no, it was like that was a little too. But I
What?
I like that so overall,
Well, wait.
trying to get
What
to
did
this.
you think? What did you think of the conversation with the individual scouts afterward? I felt that that was unbelievably fluffy on the scout stuff, where each one of them, yeah, this
Yeah,
is what you're really, you know what I mean? And you're not going to take somebody and go, listen, you did a really shitty job, Israel. Like, you're not going to do that. I get that, but like, I'd like to know a little bit more about what each of them. What they really did, where they were specifically focused, like what were they looking at? But I mean, it was interesting that they did it. I just felt like that was
because I
another
missed
kind of fluff.
opportunity. The,
Yeah.
the 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 phrase I would use for episode 5 was missed opportunities. They had a ton of missed opportunities. I think overall it was exceeded my expectations. I thought the show,
Yes.
I didn't
Yes.
expect it to be as good as it was. I think there was a ton of fluff in almost every episode. They had a lot of stuff they could easily have taken out, and some of it was just scenes and music of things and montages that they could have taken out. But I get it that they're just building a vibe. But then there were these really odd things that were in there that I didn't have a problem with because I eat that stuff up. But I'm thinking there's no substance. But episode 5 was almost all of that.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
was too much. Even the draft stuff, like I said, the Giants' life stuff. I got more out of the Giants' life draft coverage than I did from Hard Knocks on episode 5. On the actual day of the draft, the 3 days of the draft, I got more out of the Giants than I did from NFL films. So the other 4 episodes were well worth worth the investment, and I thought they did great. I thought they revealed more than they did. I never thought they would expose as much as they did. I know it got edited, and there are things that aren't in there that we would like to know. And I'm sure Shane admitted he knew that where the mics were. So
Right.
if you're going to go back to these old comedies where you're in a spy agency and you're trying to not to be heard, and you go outside and run the sprinklers or something like that, you could just see, when Shane and Dable really wanted to have a really serious conversation, they probably went into the parking lot or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't want this on camera. We don't want the mics hearing this. So there was some of that. And the only last comment I have on the overall production is what I mentioned to you last week. And I think this was deliberate. We never saw the overarching strategic discussion about where are we as a team, what is the plan moving forward to get to a Super Bowl. We didn't
Right.
see that. Did that happen, or are they just reacting? I would like to think, and I'm going to think, that happened and they just didn't want that captured on tape, and they didn't have those conversations at the facility. Those conversations happened in somebody's home someplace, private conversations, those types of things.
Yeah, I thought overall I actually I was pretty happy. I was really worried when they said it. I was like, oh my God, here we go. You take enough crap as it is already, because the Giants are the New York metropolitan area, big media market. They get kind of thrown out there even when they're not playing well, because they just have a fan base. So you take a lot of crap because we've been pretty bad for a while. So I was really like, oh boy, this could go sideways fast, especially if it became the Daniel Jones love fest. If we were going to try to tell everybody it's fine, he just got hurt, we're totally committed. And I'm with you. I didn't get that. I didn't get that feeling at all. In fact, they're literally biding their time. If we didn't get the guy we wanted right now, we're going to build around. And I think unless Jones wins a whole bunch of games this year, and I mean a whole bunch of games, and it includes a playoff game, we're getting a quarterback in the offseason. It might be a backup to like a rookie to come in and one more year if that's how they want to do it. But I think no matter what, they're bringing somebody in. This is Jones's last year to really do whatever. And if he plays well enough, I think they'll trade him if they can find somebody to take him. But we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But I like the overall piece. I felt like it reminded me, this is going to sound funny. It reminded me of Game of Thrones. If you took each episode like Game of Thrones seasons, right? It got you in, it got you in, it got you in, and then there was this buildup, and the fourth episode was like it was okay, it was good, but not great. But the build up to five, and then five was kind of like
Yeah.
I was expecting draft room drama, and there was
It's funny
nothing.
that you mentioned that because I'm binge watching Game of Thrones again right now.
Nice.
Funny that you bring that up. So, and I don't want to get to season 8 again.
Yeah, right.
It was kind of like that. I guess I just expected more in the final episode, and it just was kind of flat.
Right.
But again, some of that was because of what it was. I just thought they dropped the ball on it. So, but again, good big takeaways. Big takeaways. They're not sold on Daniel Jones. Unlike you, I still think he can save his career here, but the odds are stacked against him, both because of injuries and performance. He had a good day of practice today, so that's important. So he had a good day. He had a terrible day on Tuesday. He had a really good day today. Say what you will about Mara, he didn't get the final say this year.
Right.
Shane called the shots, so you can say Mara bad, whatever, but he let the GM, call a shot. He put them, whatever you want to call it, passive aggressive or whatever you want to call it, pressure
Sure.
on him.
Yeah.
He didn't get his way. And I think it was again, the positional value thing came into focus really clearly about we're not going to spend money on a running back that's not, and it's not working, and a guy that's probably not going to get any better.
Right.
He might have a better season in Philadelphia for a number of reasons, but he's getting older. He's got a lot of mileage. We can spend our money on the offensive line. And I think most Giants fans that really watch the game know our problem has been we can't block. The quarterback doesn't have time, and the running backs don't have any holes. And until you fix the offensive line and really fix the offensive line, it doesn't matter what you do at those other positions. So they said, this is crazy. We're got to fix the offensive line, and we're going to spend there. And we're not going to spend money on a safety. We want to get somebody who can get after the quarterback because Dexter and Thibodeau can't do it by themselves. Aziz hasn't panned out. We got to get somebody opposite of them to take the pressure off of them, and that so I think those are the big picture takeaways from me. So.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%, and I wonder. I will say this: I didn't come away from this feeling like there was buffoonery within. What I took away from this, from one piece that I wish I hadn't seen, and some of it could be stage 2 for another reason. It could be to look like I'm the good guy and I did my best too, but I don't believe that. I believe he truly feels that way. I think Mara has a fan piece to him. He's a fan.
Right.
He was a fan of his dad, his dad, and this, everything about this was it's family. He's a fan of the Giants, and he's a fan of some of the players, and that sometimes is a problem, and that's what I saw here. But you're right. I didn't see what I saw was implied influence, or at least I'm showing you that I'm displeased, but Shane did what he was going to do. And I think that part of it is good. I liked seeing how that went. I don't have a lot of concern. I actually feel pretty good about the staff seeing them in action. I like Brown. I just said he felt a little nervous from time to time talking, but seeing it a second time, it depends on when they're questioning him and kind of how that was questioned. But overall, he's very knowledgeable. He's a young guy, so he's a guy that we can hopefully build up. He could get poached at some point, but regardless, I feel pretty good about that. I like Bowen, the little bit that we saw of him. The one thing that I'll say with what he was saying, people forget the Giants defense, the best Giants defenses we've ever had, never had a superstar in the secondary. We had decent players in the secondary. Right. Hell, we won a Super Bowl with Herb Welch playing after Terry Kennard blew his knee out.
I was terrified when we lost Terry Kennard and Herb Welch, because I thought, especially against John Elway, I thought that was going to be
and you had Elvis Toast Patterson was still out on one side. Perry Williams, very physical, but not a guy who's going to pick the ball off. Mark Collins was a young player. He was basically a rotational player at that
He was
point.
a rookie the '86 season too.
And
So
so you had Herb Welch and Kenny Hill were our safeties in that Super Bowl. So we won by just dominating in the run and getting after the quarterback. And that's kind of where we are right at the moment. You mentioned a name that we haven't even really talked about at all. They didn't really mention him in fact, I don't think they mentioned him at all. Is Ozolari. What do we have with him, if anything? He's been injured so much, but he's not injured right now. But I haven't heard a peep about him. Have you? Like,
oh, he's been lighting up in camp. So every day he keeps getting mentioned in camp. So his problem is staying healthy. So if he's on the second team, obviously, so he's going against second team players. But there's been like day after day, and it wasn't so much today, but day after day, he keeps coming up with, they aren't really allowed to sack the quarterbacks, but
right.
they call them sacks. So, but every day he's got a sack or two sacks in each practice. And he's in a contract year. This is a big year for
Right.
him. So as a rotational player, I would not discount him at all. What Giants fans should hope for with him is if he had a really big year, they're not going to re-sign him because he's going to be too expensive because they're going to have
He's already got too much out there.
and they got too many at the position. But you're thinking comp pick at that point. You want him to get signed by somebody else for an astronomical contract, and hopefully you get like a third round pick for him at when he leaves. So, but he's had a good camp. So we should do a show soon on what's going on in camp.
Agreed.
Because there's been a lot of interesting guys, no-name guys that nobody was even thinking about or who are having really good camps so far. And then people that we were counting on who have been missing in action, like Evan Neal, of course. But also Schmitz, like you just talked, John Michael Schmitz has been in action. So we should do that. But anyways, good show. I just thought I dropped the ball at the end a little bit, but it's going to be interesting to see if other teams are going to sign up to do this because they might be a little bit worried about what they might look at what the Giants did and say, we can't have that. It's going to be interesting to see who agrees to this moving on, if anybody does.
Right. No, I agree. I thought it was good. I think this show is good. I'm glad we get to talk because you can type and stuff. It's hard without having that continual conversation about back and forth.
Right.
And I like seeing what you saw versus what I saw, and just so people know, you and I are not always in agreement on what we see. We are not parroting each other. We don't talk and go, let's agree to that.
No, we're gonna have arguments.
Yeah, exactly. And that's fine. I have a different mindset. I will say this. I can't remember the poster's name, but I do want to mention this thing. I had mentioned last week on the show, we were talking about Daniel Jones and accuracy. And one of the things I have a problem with is the crossing patterns where he throws behind a guy. There was a highlight today that everybody's like, oh, look at the pass to Tracy.
Right.
Look at the pass. Tracy has to turn around. He has to catch it. Now he's facing the defender that was chasing him instead of going forward.
Right.
The poster's on it. Whoa, every quarterback has. I'm like, I get it. Okay, I was going to say something bad about you, and I don't mean to because I don't even know who you are. I'm not calling Jones out for that one pass. I literally said that's his biggest pattern of problems.
It's a pattern. Yeah.
And this is with there's no contact, there's no nothing. How do you throw it so poorly to your right? Like you're literally throwing in the direction that your arm should be more than coming. It's not like he's crossing and you're going across your body. He was coming that way and you threw it behind him again. I'm like, those are like we talked about.
Yeah.
That's your de facto running game. The short passing game is going to help us in the running game. And if you're doing that, if we needed 7 and you do that and he gets tackled after a 6-yard gain, now you're having to gamble. Do we go for it on 4th? Are we punting? What's the deal? You throw it in front of him, he's at least 7, 8, 9, 10 yards more down the field. He was wide open coming across and you threw it behind him.
Right.
That bothers me. So anyway.
The only thing I will say is it's early.
Yeah.
Again, it's been 6 years, but it's early. He's coming off an ACL. Right, people are going, oh, here come the excuses. And he did get better today. He was better. What I want to see is him. I'm not saying he can't have a bad practice, but I want to see the trending. I want the arrow trending up on him.
Right.
So as we get in, I want to see him playing the preseason. I hope they don't. The first game they probably won't play the starters too much, but I want him to play a half in the second preseason game. I want him to play a quarter in at least the final preseason game. I want him to get used to playing football again. And like you said, he's got to start hitting people, not just hitting people, but he's got to start hitting people in a place where they can do damage with the football after the catch. That's our roster is filled with those kinds of guys now.
Right.
Our roster is filled with run after the catch guys. So you have to start hitting these guys. You know, they're going to throw to the running backs. They're going to throw to the tight ends. They're going to throw to both Malik Neighbors and Wandell are great run after the catch guys. They're just going to have to. They're going to have to. He's going to do that, and if he doesn't, that's why I started a post this week about, you know, with the deep passing game, but the same thing as with the intermediate game with the ball placement. At some point, I see Brian Dable throwing his clipboard again, his electronic clipboard, and saying, you know, I need somebody else in here. I need somebody else
Right.
in the lineup. I hope it doesn't come to that. I don't know what's going to happen. I really don't. I do think if they do end up in the playoffs again, they'll keep him another year. Unless he completely collapses in the playoffs. But we'll have to see. We'll have to. It depends on
Yeah.
It depends on who's available in the free agency market and and the senior year, the upcoming year in college football. You know, it's perceived that the quarterback class isn't that strong, but that always changes. So
Yeah.
if they get into November and that narrative on the quarterback class is better or worse, that's going to impact what they do at quarterback too. Same with free agency. Who's available in free agency and who's available in the NFL draft? Where are we likely going to be picking? And again, quarterback hell is a real thing. We may be in that position. I don't know. I will not discount Daniel being back next year. I think a lot of things have to happen for that to happen, though. I would not bet
Right.
on it. I
Right.
wouldn't bet on it. I certainly wouldn't do that. I just won't discount it.
So I'll say three things to what you said. Well, not all to what you said, but I'm gonna say three things. First one is, who would have going into the a year and a half ago, who would have said that Bo Nix
No, yeah,
and
exactly.
Michael Penix would have been in the first round?
McCarthy.
I mean, Nix flamed out at Auburn. I mean, you know, he's like, and then he goes to place for the wide open in Oregon, and you're like, oh, okay, well, and Nick and Penix was at Indiana, I believe, and he got injured, and then he ends up out west, and great, that's a great offense and all that stuff, but and McCarthy too.
Well, no one was talking about McCarthy. No one was talking about McCarthy back in February.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's
so there are guys that this year that could really surprise and play well, and they suddenly become the thing. It happens every draft, so I'm not overly concerned with that. So that's one. The second is we're gonna have to kind of time it up for each show, like what we're drinking. I had water tonight, and that's not cool. We need to go, and then because I've seen other shows do it. We'll have to say what it is we're drinking. The third thing is that I'll go.
I was just gonna say I'm drinking El Guapo beer as a joke.
Oh,
anyone who's ever seen the Three Amigos, my wife bought this as a joke, and I'm finishing it up. So I'm drinking
nice.
El Guapo. So if you know the movie The Three Amigos, you'll get the inside joke on that one. It's an
Awesome.
IPA. So.
Nice. And then the third thing is I want to ask you, but I also kind of posing it to the site. As you know, I try very hard to get guests, and we will be getting guests, and I've been working on it now. Besides the guys that we all know that we would love to have on, are there guys from the past that you know might not have been the guy that people are interested in? Because there are some players that I am trying to get, and I didn't know, and I want to. But I don't always want to just do from I mean, I have a great memory, I think, of Giants past and things that I grew up with, but I also want to do with some other people. You mentioned somebody, I don't want to say his name out loud because I have not been able to get connected with him yet. But You mentioned one person last show that Phil Simms said was the best receiver he had, and I am trying to get him. So just keep that in mind.
Interesting, yeah.
But there are other players that I'm trying. So you think about it, and if people come, you know, feel free to post it or email us or whatever of who you think, because I'm going to try to reach out to different people and bring them on. Obviously, you know, fully jump, but sometimes I might be able to get players from other teams too. So
the thing that's interesting about that is this. So when we last did the show back 15 years ago, we really were. The legacy players to us were the 1980s champion and 86 championship and the 90 championship team.
Correct.
But now, since 15 years have passed, our legacy has expanded, so we can now include two more Super Bowl teams.
That's correct.
Of retired players that the younger fans on our site, I'm sure, would love to hear from some of the heroes of those championships teams in 2007 and
And
to
11.
2011.
Yep. Yep.
So that would be interesting to have. Now you were able to get some of those guys back in the day when they were still playing. You got
Right.
Corey Webster to come on. You got Kevin Boss to come on the show. You got some of those guys. I think we had
Yeah.
Dave Tollefson
Dave
even
Tollefson.
was on the
Dave
show.
Tollefson, I talked to him multiple times. In fact, I don't know if it was on our show or if it was on my other sports show, but I literally talked to him on his way out to Kevin Boss's wedding. So
Yeah.
we did a thing with him. We had Steve Smith
Yeah,
that
Steve
came
Smith.
on.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had players and honestly, the Giants helped with that a little bit too. So
Right.
for those who don't remember, they actually helped us, and they helped us with Jerry Reese. Pat Hanlon came on numerous times. So it's a little different world now, as we've talked about,
Right.
because a lot of these guys, they do their own little, Instagram stuff and their Facebook stuff, and they've got agents who cover things for them, and the teams are going to be a little, but there are ways to try. So I'm not as confident about current players' our ability to do that, just because they're so guarded. But the past players, yeah, they seem pretty open. And once you get one, that's usually the in to some others. So that's
Right.
the good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know how you get some of these guys, but I'm not putting any pressure on you for future.
So I'm trying, man. I'm trying.
But anyways, we got enough content. We got enough to talk about this as a team in transition. We'll have standalone shows without guests, and then we'll have shows where we let the guests talk. We'll try not to talk
Exactly.
over them and let them speak, and we'll go from there. So
And we did media members, so we'll do covering the team. We'll try to get those on, those who will be willing. I think we'll be able to do that. And in the past, we got media members for the opposing team. So we get a little preview of what we might be looking at. And I'm going to try that route too, as we move into the season. So
yeah, and it's tougher and
yeah,
tougher really to keep, to do preview opponents because there's so much transition in the NFL. Every year it seems like there's more and more players changing teams
yep.
and coaches. Coaches are changing, like a third of the coaches. And I think I saw a crazy stat where half the coordinators changed during the
Mm,
offseason, or nearly half the coordinators. So it's really as a fan, it's really tough to sort of keep track of what's going on with other teams unless you're in that area and you're reading their press all the time. So like when I write the game previews now, it's like it's a nightmare now because the teams have changed. They change so much on a year-to-year basis now. It's like just schemes and systems that they run, things like that. So
right. Well, I think we said an hour and
yep,
we
we're a
blew
little
right
over.
we blew right past it like we knew we
Yep.
would. So but I think it was a great show.
Yep.
As we covered Hard Knocks. I think maybe next week we'll take a look at camp, and we should have an announcement pretty soon on who that first guest is. So unless you have something else, I'm going to
No, the only
say
thing I will tease that we would have that guest on sooner, except he wants to time it with his announcement in the top 100 list.
and
So
yeah, that was his choice. That
it
he
was his
that's what he said.
choice. He said I will come on as soon as I'm announced on that list. So we
And
have a small audience. I don't know why he's waiting on us.
But hey, you know what? But that was awesome the way he
Yeah,
said that, and he
yeah.
wanted it to make it, as he said, I want to make it as big as I can for your show. So he wanted to tie it to that. I was all for it. So
Right. Yeah.
we'll be announcing that pretty soon. But so thanks for listening to BBI Online Live, and we are thinking about possibly changing the name. So don't worry about that, folks. But I'm John McDevitt, Eric Kennedy. We appreciate it, and thanks for listening.